And all that I'm trying to say, and this is not actual code, this is pseudocode, so this is why you see all these error messages popping up. But it's if I'm able to remember RenPy. And RenPy, let me put a link here, it's free software. It's very popular for making visual novels, even though you can kind of jackhammer it for a couple other uses. One of the most notable visual novels made using this engine is Doki Doki Literature Club, and it just kind of goes to show you the full potential of it. It does make use of Python, but even if you don't know how to use coding language, you can kind of go online and see some templates and just figure out how to do those base executions, right? It's like if someone was learning a fighting game for the very first time, they wouldn't know quarter circle forward or forward down forward, right? But if they had a model and they could just try to like replicate that, there's plenty of guides out there. So if I'm able to remember how to use RenPy, if that's true, if this condition is true, I'm going to review a concept called state, and I'll explain that in a second. Otherwise, if I'm not able to remember RenPy at all, I'm just going to jump straight into some poverty fighting games, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we won't be using that slot machine app that I designed that picks a certain amount of games, picks from an array of games, and picks a certain stipulation on how I should play those games. Just going to check out these very lesser known fighting titles, some coming from indie developers, while everyone else is talking about Street Fighter 6 and King of Fighters 15 and whatnot, right? So I want to be clear that there's tons of other visual novel software that's out there. You know, I haven't touched RenPy in probably like 5 years. And back then, I definitely didn't have any kind of coding and programming knowledge at all. So it's kind of cool to revisit this to see if I understand anything better. There is a tutorial there that will probably start off running through that first. But what I want to do is review a programming concept called state. And I think this is really helpful and useful for most people. Again, even if you're not a programmer, even if you're not trying to transition to a field of coding, thinking in terms of, hey, Black, thanks for popping by, always. And yeah, man, it was fun hanging last night. I was glad I was able to catch you guys on y'all's stream, and it was cool to see that King of Fighters 15 gameplay. State. What is state? Like, not trying to get too scientific, not trying to get too much into programming, but if we think about a state of being, right? Really breaking it down. Like right now, most of you're sitting, right? You could be sitting, that's one state. You could be standing, that's another state. You could be in motion, that's another state. You could be laying down and sleeping. Those are different states of being, right? If you're in a classroom, you could be in an attentive state, right? You could be in a ignorant state where you're not paying attention to your Zoom professor at all or whatever, right? But these are just all multiple states of being. And the more you can think about that concept, you know, do we try to multitask? Are we doing more things at one time? Sure. Like even though I'm sitting here, I'm trying to talk to an imaginary audience. I'm moving my hands. My eyes are blinking. Yeah, there's, of course, a lot more that's to it. But being a better programmer, thinking in terms of a developer, is not oversimplifying a solution, but oversimplifying concepts so you can talk through it, talk through the process, and talk through the flow. And like I said, this pivot that I'm trying to do, doing this fighting code, this is more practice for me because it's not only good for your interviews where the communication comes into play, but you just don't want to get ahead of yourself, right? If we talk about that state, you know, I could totally imagine it. If I was tasked with introducing this concept that, okay, John is going to give a lecture about state, and I gave that intro that I just gave you right here, I could totally imagine a student being like, well, that's not true. You're doing multiple things at once. And again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. And those are all important things. Those are things that you want to acknowledge and consider. But when you're starting at your base, going through all these different things, one thing at a time, right? That advice of one thing at a time, I think it goes over people's heads just because it sounds so simple. But we really, really want to take a simple approach. I'm going to transition it to fighting games real quick, okay? We all know offense and defense, right? But if we break that down further, are you in an attack state? Are you in a running state? Are you in a block state? How many errors do we make in fighting games because we think the opponent is still in a block state, but no, they've already recovered and they have the time to go into an attack state. You think through in terms like that instead of just, oh, everything's moving too fast, or, oh, I hit him first. What is happening in those moments? It all goes back to state, right? In my head, I was like, do I want to pull from a very bleak real life example, the state of the world, everything that's going in Europe, everything is in a very bleak state, right? Just all these different states of being. But focusing it back here, a really, really good example, my friend Nick, he's always encouraging me to think through the states of a stoplight. And true to Nick fashion, he'll give me a project or assignment and then he'll solve it himself before I really go through the process. So he said that, you don't need anything fancy. You don't actually have to code it out. Just take a pen and paper and sketch it all out. But Nick is a way better artist than me. I link him in my About section here on Twitch, and you can check out his website where he gives some tutorials on code. But this is what Nick did. So, if we think about a stoplight, stoplight has all these different states. It has a red light, a yellow light. I don't know why he wrote orange. Nick, it's yellow, duh. And then we have a green light. All these states signal different things. You need to stop. You need to slow down. It's okay to go. In Massachusetts, go, go, go. But, what is it supposed to be? Slow down, go, stop, or go, slow down, stop. Thinking through the order right there. Okay, so when you break it down like that, there's lots of things the stoplight's doing, but these are the main states that we got to think through. Now, once we've established that, we can add a little bit more criteria to it, right? Because a stoplight, unless it's glitched out, and even if it's glitched out, it has different states, but there's never going to be a situation where it's red, yellow, and green all at the same time, right? There's no situation where it's going to be yellow and green at the same time, red and green at the same time. If anything, if the stoplight's busted, it's going to be flashing a color. And usually that's flashing yellow, right? But what are the other criteria that we can add here? So usually it's going to be on some sort of timer, right? Because there has to be some sort of condition for it to kick itself over into a different state. So normally, we pray for that green light, so we can keep going. But after a certain duration, something has to signal it so it can kick over to that yellow light state. And then from the yellow light state, it's got to kick over to the red state. And we know that the distance between green and yellow, we want that to be longer. And then once it's signaled to yellow, the transition from yellow to red is a lot shorter. Is it actually 15 seconds? Is it actually 5 seconds? Probably not. But just thinking through in this motion right here, right? And then from red to green, that's probably going to be an even longer state. Is it actually 30 seconds? We don't have to worry about that. But thinking through this flow. And you want to take it very step by step like that. We could say, oh yeah, you have a stoplight, it's green, yellow, and red. It's going to go from green to yellow to red. But we want to think of each one of those states as its own entity. So we have a green state. Then we have this transition state. Then we're transitioning over to the yellow state. Then from the yellow state, we have another transition state. Then we're finally at the red state. And then we have one more transition state. Okay? When you have it all mapped out, you think about the process like that, you have all these clues to help you actually program it and actually code it. If you just let it sit in your head like, oh, what is the stoplight supposed to be? All these things it's supposed to do, you're more than likely going to overwhelm yourself. You're technically correct, but think through the state, right? And I don't mean just you. I am really talking to myself. John, think through the state, okay? Don't overwhelm yourself. Like when you get stuck, like even if you don't know how to code this timing, maybe you don't even know how to code that color, having this, like you got to take care of that. That's like your to-do list. That's like your task. Instead of having a blank sheet of paper, it's like, well, I know I'm going to make a stoplight, but I don't even know how to get started. Yes, you do. Like, you're never going to be absolutely, completely stuck, especially if you think through the states. And what's this last sheet here? Yeah, this is just another way of repurposing that image. So, this is helpful, but if we think through the flow, it's the exact same thing. Let's start with green go. This is one state. We have this transition state. We're over into the yellow state. We have another transition state. We have a red state. And then we have one more transition back to green. Okay, so that's, Nick, why would I doodle this when you have such an awesome explainer right here? And it's great that I'm talking through it. Having a conversation about things, that's a good way to reinforce it. Trying to teach other people, that's another good way to reinforce things. Instead of me just making another doodle in my notebook. That's why I thought, well, often Nick gives lessons like this, and they're super beneficial for me. He never tweets them out hardly. And I always think about recollecting those conversations we have and repurposing them for more people to witness. And I guess like a Twitch stream could be one thing, but that's why I wanted to go and mess with Ren'P, because a visual novel, basically is just text. I could write out a blog, I could tweet up a thread, but what if I made, just a short little snippet of this explanation in a visual novel format? That's something a little bit different. And I was going to say earlier, there's other visual novel makers that are a lot more newbie friendly, like the user interface makes it a whole lot easier. Tyranno Builder is one software. It's on Steam. I think it's like $15, but it goes on sale for like $8. Then there's an actual software called Visual Novel Maker, and it's a lot more expensive, but I think it's supposed to make things even easier for you. But I would really say, don't be afraid to mess with Ren'P, and we'll go through Ren'P together so you can see. Let's go ahead and switch this up.